Holy Father, Divine Creator, true source of light and fountain of wisdom, pour forth your brilliance upon our dense intellect. Disperse the darkness which covers us, that of sin and of ignorance. Grant us a penetrating mind to understand, a retentive memory, method and easy learning, the ability to comprehend, an abundant grace in expressing ourselves. Fill us with your knowledge, O Lord, so we may walk in the straight and narrow path. Guide the beginning of our works, and bring them to successful completion. Amen. In this video, we will be discussing about the constitutions of the Philippines. To fully understand each constitution, let's start with the definition of a constitution. What is constitution? A constitution is a set of rules that guides how a country, state, or other political organization works. So this is like a rule book for the government, and all rules dated in this rule book must be followed by the government. This document also creates the branches, the powers, and the responsibilities of the government. It also contains the rights of the people, and it is illegal for the government to violate these rights. The Constitution is also often known as supreme law of the land. This means that it is the highest law in the country. A constitution to be successful must be both stable and flexible. Every February 2 is our Constitution Day. The latest Constitution of the Philippines was ratified on February 2, 1987. This is the reason why we celebrate our Constitution Day every second day of February. Now, let's move on to the importance of the Constitution. Why is it important to us to have a Constitution? First, it maintains law and order. If our country without a Constitution, we Filipinos will be denied of our rights. It will be in chaos. An anarchy is possible. Second, it imposes rules and regulations. The Constitution serves as a guide to the government officials and managing the government. It tells them the things they should do and the things they should not do. Third, it protects the right and freedom of the citizen. Freedom of expression is one of the people's rights expressed in our Constitution. But this is just one right. There are other rights that we can ensure because of the Constitution. Fourth, it limits the power of the government. Without the Constitution, greedy officials will take advantage and the government will function according to its will. So it's a must for us to have a Constitution. Now, let's move on to the Malolos Constitution. In our Philippine History 101, we already discussed that the Philippines was under the Spanish rule for 333 years. Most Filipino thought it was a hopeless case until the Spanish-Filipino Agreement came. This agreement was called as Biak na Bato. The Spanish government agreed to grant self-rule to the Philippines in 3 years if Aguinaldo would go to exile and surrender his arms. Aguinaldo agreed to this idea. However, there is a tiny problem with this agreement. The Spanish did not pay the agreed amount. Likewise, the Filipinos did not surrender their arms. As a result, the agreement was a complete failure. This forced Aguinaldo to go back to the Philippines and declare the Philippine independence from Spain in June 12, 1898. The Filipinos were happy with the idea of being independent until the U.S.-Spain secret agreement came. U.S. wanted the Philippines as a colony. This forced Aguinaldo to issue a decree forming a Malolos Congress, which was a committee who was assigned to make the constitution for the first Philippine Republic, and 3 days after it was established. The Malolos Constitution, or the 1899 Constitution, is the first constitution for the first Philippine Republic and the first Republican Constitution in Asia. Here are the salient features of Malolos Constitution. First is a popular representative government. Unicameral legislature means there's only one legislator called the Assembly. The Assembly had full control over the executive power. The president was elected by the assembly. There was already a separation of the church and state. There was already a Bill of Rights. And last, it already had a compulsory and free basic education. Now, there is a problem with this constitution. It was not fully implemented due to eruption of the Philippines, U.S. war in which the Philippines lost the battle. After the Spanish rule, the American came the Philippines. The Filipinos were again colonized for the second time.
1935 Constitution of the Philippines is an American-inspired constitution. It provides the legal basis of the Commonwealth government or the transition government before the guaranteeing the Philippine independence. 1935 Constitution was written in 1940, approved and adopted by the Commonwealth of the Philippines in 1935 to 1946. Later used by the Third Republic of the Philippines, it was written with an eye to the meeting approval of the United States government. 1935 Constitution used unicameral legislature, but it was amended in 1940 to bicameral Congress. Here are the salient features of 1935 Constitution. First, it had bicameral legislature, means two legislatures composed of Senate and House of Representatives. Second, the president was elected to a 4-year term together with the vice president without re-election. Third, it introduced the right to vote by male citizens of the Philippines who were 21 years old or over and are able to read and write. After 2 years, the right was extended to a woman as well. In 1935 Constitution, Commonwealth of the Philippines was established and ratified on May 17, 1935. This Commonwealth, defining its power, composition, and organization of the government of the Philippine Islands. There are 3 branches of government to separate the power of Constitution. First, the legislative branch. Second, the executive branch. And third, the judicial branch. This constitution was not the first constitution, but it was the first one to be fully implemented.
Excellent features of 1943 Constitution. The 1943 Constitution provided for strong executive powers. The legislature was a unicameral National Assembly, and only anti-US can run for election. Now, there was also a problem with the Constitution. It was recognized as legitimate and finding only in the Japanese-controlled areas of the Philippines, and it was completely ignored by the U.S. government and in the Philippine government in exile. This is just a short-lived constitution because the American came back and freed us from the Japanese, and the 1935 Constitution was restored. After a few years, the American finally gave us an independence on July 4, 1946. Various presidents ruled the Philippines using the 1935 Constitution until President Marcos came. Marcos was first elected in 1965 and was re-elected in 1969. During his time, there was a plan to make a new constitution. Delegates were elected to a Constitution Convention which began to meet in 1971. In 1972, just before the end of Marcos' second term, he declared martial law because of the growing communists. But, according to some victims of martial law, he did this to influence the ongoing Constitution Convention. As a result, the Constitution Convention saw the Constitution in line with what President Marcos wished.
This was the 1973 salient features. It established for the first time in Philippine history a parliamentary government with prime minister and president. Legislative powers was vested in a unicameral National Assembly elected by the people. It legalized all decrees, proclamations, and orders of the president. There were various amendments in the 1973 Constitution, but the most controversial was the 1976 amendments. Here are the amendments in 1976 Constitution. The National Assembly was replaced by the interim Batasang Pambansa. The President would also become the Prime Minister and continue exercise legislative powers until martial law was lifted. Now, Marcos thought that every day was in place until one of his enemy, Benigno Nino Aquino, came back to the Philippines. Unfortunately for Ninoy, it was not a happy ending for him. He was assassinated, and this led to a widespread outrage and forced Marcos to hold the snap election. The results was controversial that forced the Filipinos to a historic uprising known as EDSA People Power 1, where Marcos and his family went to exile and Cory Aquino became the president. Immediately after Cory Aquino became the president, she replaced the 1973 Constitution into the 1986 Constitution.
The 1986 Provisional Constitution, or popularly known as the Freedom Constitution, was promulgated by President Corazon Aquino on March 25, 1986, a provisional constitution after a successful people power revolution. Under the Freedom Constitution, executive and legislative powers are exercised by the President. The Provisional Constitution stated that the direct mandate of the people as manifested by their extraordinary action demands the complete reorganization of the government, restoration of democracy, protection of basic rights, rebuilding of confidence in the entire governmental system, eradication of graft and corruption, restoration of peace and order, maintenance of the supremacy of civilian authority over the military, and the transition to a government under a new constitution in the shortest time possible.
The 1987 Constitution, or Anti-Marcos Constitution, revolves around four themes. First, upholding of national sovereignty. Second, democratic governance and the prevention of another dictatorship. Third, respect for human rights and civil liberties. Fourth, promotion of social justice. It is not a perfect document, but it is a country's highest law binding all the citizens of the Philippines. The Constitution provided for three governmental powers, namely the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. Now, these three works like a basketball game. In basketball game, there are players, coaches, and a referee. The executive is like a coach who leads the team. The legislative, since it is divided into two houses, they act as the players of the game, trying to score points against each other. And the judicial branch is much like the referee of the game that helps settle it. There, they clarify the rules and make sure that each side is acting fairly. The basketball game would not be complete without the viewers. This is the same with the government. It would not operate without the people. The powers of the three branches are separated from one another. This is what we call separation of powers. In this system, each branch has the power to check, to stop the action by the other branches. This is to prevent any one of them from becoming too powerful.